Okay, Robin, when you're ready, up to you.
Cool, thanks man. So I've got a presentation out on my laptop over here. I don't expect everyone to see what we're talking about, but I think we can just get a general idea of what we are talking about. Of course, we'll share the presentation with Jannie, Christoph, and the rest of the team. And if you guys want to have a closer look at it, you're more than welcome to do that. So my name is Robin Mclaurie. I head up the retail distribution for smooth bonus funds. That's the AGP portfolios, the absolute growth portfolios, and so forth. What I will say is thank you for the opportunity to be able to be here in front of you guys. It's been extremely frustrating sitting behind a camera and having to have these conversations with the guys out there. Because for me, this is where the real value sits in here. Like Glenn mentioned earlier, if you guys got any questions related to the markets and so forth, I'll see as much as I can assist. And of course, I've got my colleague out here with me as well, Fatima, and we'll see how much we can, of course, assist as much as possible. What I will say that, ladies and gentlemen, is that the value always sits with your advisors. And the reason for that is us as humans, by nature, we always behaviorally, we're always susceptible to the markets, isn't it? Markets fall down, what's the natural thing to do is to try and hide away from the markets. Keep in mind we need to stay invested as much as possible. That is where the value really sits. The value sits at the bottom, the trough of the markets. Because when markets rise, that's where you're going to be picking up this value out there. That's where the value of the advisor really sits. He keeps you stable, he keeps you in the markets to make sure that we all understand what the value of what those markets are. Okay, that's not me guys, that's your advisor. I go to these guys for advice. So, from an agenda perspective, I'll be doing a little bit of an economic overview, from a global perspective as well, from a local perspective. And then really unpacking what is going on out in the world. So we know the markets are in trouble, isn't it? But you need to have answers to be able to sleep a little bit easier at night. So hopefully I can answer some of those questions today for you guys. There's a few changes coming from a retirement perspective out there in the markets. I'm not sure if everyone has heard about those changes that's happening. It's a continuous change, but in my mind, I think it's a positive change. It's a change that is needed in South Africa. Okay, we'll unpack a few of those changes. I've got a couple of lessons here, some financial 101s, like I like to call it. Just four very quick lessons that I like to touch on about the way we need to think about investing and about markets and so forth. And I can tell you guys, this is the general way of thinking about investments. It's not an old mutual perspective, it's a general way of thinking about how to invest in the markets. And then lastly, the portfolios that I look after, which I think is a fantastic solution in the markets, are the absolute growth portfolios, really the flagship fund of the company. And we'll talk about why is that the flagship fund and then some of the positives that come out of it. So, who's the real enemy out in the market, ladies and gentlemen? Is it Biden? From a United States perspective, sure, there's a lot of people that would think so. They would think that Biden is the real bad guy out there for making those decisions from his perspective. Is it President Xi from China's perspective? We know that China is, of course, closed with their markets because of the extreme COVID lockdowns from that perspective. In fact, I've got a buddy that's teaching English out in China, and he phoned me yesterday. And he said that the apartment that he stays in, next door to them, they put everyone in quarantine in that building. It's quite scary. Sure. But we understand that the markets are impacted by what these guys do. Is it President Putin by his Russian invasion of the Ukraine at the moment? Certainly yes. We would all expect that. Certainly from a short-term perspective, we understand that the volatility that Putin has driven out in the markets by increasing the price of fuel and the negative effect that he's had on the world. Remember, fuel is a major driver of inflation out there. We've seen the wheat prices increase globally because of the effects of Putin. But what I will say is that what these guys have done, what Putin has done, these things all get priced into the markets. What I mean by that, we have these portfolio managers and analysts and economists that sit behind the decisions of the way assets are priced in the market. Does that make sense? And these guys say, okay, if petrol must be $100 a barrel, we'll make it $102 a barrel. So we're pricing in the effect of what Putin does out there. So that's all priced into the market already. Or is it everyone's favorite president, Cyril Ramaphosa? from a local perspective. What does he do? How has he impacted the markets out there? Certainly his stance from a regulation perspective, being able to cut down on corruption and so forth, has had a massive effect. We've seen from a local perspective, they're talking about this thing called grey listing. Not sure how many of you have heard about that, but that's really putting a target on South Africa's back to say, there's too much corruption in your country. If you don't get this right, we'll put down even more extreme pressure onto your country where you won't be able to invest. But once again, ladies and gentlemen, these things are all priced into the market. Funnily enough, the things we read in the newspapers that scare us every day is not generally the effects that clients and advisors need to worry about in the market. The real enemy is this guy over here. And I'm not sure how many of you guys can see him over there, but that is Jerome Powell. I'm not sure how many of us would even recognize his face if we walk past him tomorrow. But Jerome Powell heads up the Federal Reserve in the United States. And his role is to control inflation. So what's been happening, he's been increasing interest rates in America. Now, interest rate increases affects every asset class out there in the world, ladies and gentlemen. It affects your equities, your bonds, your cash, your property. And there's this old saying in our industry that says that when the United States sneezes, everyone else catches a cold in the world. And that's effectively what's happening out there. The United States controls exactly what happens out in the market. So because they are increasing interest rates from a United States perspective, the rest of the world sort of have to follow suit. The beauty of it is that from a South African perspective, we've not been as aggressive as the rest of the world in increases in those interest rates. There's parts of the world, Brazil as an example, I think the interest rates are about 18% right now. Imagine that. I think that one time they were at 2%, they're all the way up to 18% right now. So they have to hike it up as much as possible due to the inflationary pressures. Now, just a summary from a global macro perspective, like we said, when the United States sneezes, everyone else catches a cold. So we need to understand the importance from a global perspective. One of our economists says he actually doesn't read South African newspapers because the effect of that on the market is less than 5% what the South African market is. They rather read what's happening out in the United States, Europe, and so forth from that global macro perspective. And we just look at some of those key pointers over there. And unfortunately, we have to paint the bad scenario that could possibly happen out in the market, ladies and gentlemen. Global growth is looking to slow. For 2022, we've been in what they refer to as a technical recession, which means that the global economy is down at the moment. The global recession, there's expectation going forward in the markets. I hope I'm wrong, but there is an expectation that the big recession will hit next year. What I will say is that there is value in recessions also, because remember, you're buying at the bottom of the market. It's like when you're going into a mall and you've seen each shop saying there's 50% off on items in the shop. That's what a recession does. It offers you discounts in the market.
Black Friday.
It's a Black Friday. It's not a great thing. It's not a great thing to go through, especially when you've got your pension and your provident money in there. But the value of making money comes out of those sort of markets. Does that make sense? So what I will say is, please don't panic when you're seeing those sort of effects happening in your portfolios. You'll see as quickly as they go down, they actually go up much quicker than what they fall down in the markets. And you don't have to take my word for that. There's Fatima, we can obviously share some of that research that backs up that information as well. We spoke about inflation being a massive driver of these interest rate hikes at the moment. The expectation going forward, at least for the short term from a United States perspective, hopefully for the next 6 to 8 months, is that there will still be increase in interest rate hikes. And the reason for that, South Africa's inflation target rates are, I've got some nice prizes here, guys. We keep talking the whole time. I've got little mugs over here, so I'm going to ask you 1 or 2 questions if you don't mind. Little mugs over here, nice coffee mugs, but it doubles up as a flask as well. So I'll ask 1 or 2 questions. We've got about 4 of these mugs, and then hopefully we can get everyone chatting a little bit instead of me talking here. Okay, so America's inflation target is 2%. South Africa's, what do you think it is? That's between a range. That's between a range.
6.5.
Very close. Very close.
7.5.
That's much closer. So the target range for South Africa is between 3 to 6% for us to be able to manage our inflation, our interest rates from a South African perspective. It's been managed very well for a very, very long time. It was between, I think the last time I saw for the last 3 years, it was about 5.2%. But of course, off the back of what's happening in the markets right now, we're currently sitting at 7.5% inflation for the year, which is still much lower than the rest of the world, ladies and gentlemen. Remember who we compare against out there. We compare against the emerging markets, your Russia, your Brazil, your India, your China, and so forth. And from that perspective, we've not done too bad from that side. Okay, just a little prize over there, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so I spoke about markets always pricing in asset classes. They have priced in the effects of a recession. But what I will say is that you can never fully price the recession in. It's just one of those things. Are you going to get a small tsunami, or are you going to get this massive tsunami coming in out there? So we don't know where we're going to land. It's not a great thing to be able to present to you guys right now, but just keep in mind that when markets fall, there's always expectation to go up again out there. So yeah, so once again, market volatility seems to be out there in the markets. We've seen that. Spoke to Christoph earlier. On Friday, the markets climbed almost 5%. So that's just how it works out there, ladies and gentlemen. And unless you are in there to take advantage of that recovery, you're not going to be able to do that if you're in some other asset class instead of your growth assets in the market. Okay. From a South African perspective, always topical, isn't it? We love talking about it at Prize with family and so forth. What is happening in South Africa? And we love talking about the negative stuff. But there's a lot of good things from a South African perspective as well. So for one, our economy is starting to normalize from post-COVID at the moment. We clearly see that China, like I said, they're still going through extreme COVID pressures from that perspective. We're at least here being able to sit in front of each other with no masks at the moment. And I think that is really, really fantastic, guys. So we should also appreciate the little things out there, like being able to see each other face to face at the moment. So once again, domestic growth will be dependent on what happens from a global perspective. Like I said, United States sneezes, the rest of us get a cold. Maybe we get COVID instead of a cold, but that's also not a bad thing. We've got some medicine for that. Okay. So electricity and transport, Eskom and Transnet, very, very topical. But the positive thing to take out from that is that there's some privatization going on there, isn't it? We see this, we at least read about that in the newspapers. From an Eskom perspective, renewable energy, a huge part of our portfolios is renewable energy at the same time. I'll discuss that when we get there. Transnet, there's discussions ongoing that SOEs, we know that it's failed state in terms of SOEs, but there's also talk of making a huge part of those assets privatized. And that's really good news out there, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, so for the next 2 to 3 years, we're probably looking at growth at about 2% from a South African perspective. And then lastly, probably one of our most topical things out there is from a politics perspective. We know that that the ANC is of course having their government discussions going on right now. Their voting is happening in December, and a huge part of that, and why I say it's positive, is at least we'll have less disruptions from an Eskom perspective. And the reason why I say that is there's been massive sabotage from Eskom, and that all's backed off from what's happening in the ANC elective conference that's happening at the end of the year. So the expectation is once everything normalizes and Cyril wins, the expectation is that Cyril wins, is that everything starts to normalize from a political position from South Africa. Okay.
But say if you don't win, like say McKinsey comes in December, it will have a
it will have a massive impact
Huge
on the
impact,
country.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think sorry to interrupt, one of the other economists we spoke to, John Els, actually put down scenarios. What is the best and worst impact for South Africa? And the best is Cyril wins again.
Yeah.
And the worst is EFF wins. So it is vital for our country that Cyril wins again. Sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you for that.
Talk about elections and the American by-elections that's coming out now, with talks that
Trump is going to start again.
Yeah, yeah. Funny enough, Isaac actually spoke about that one. Isaac Gorina, one of our head economists also at our mutual, and he spoke about that and he said the real risk does sit with Trump winning again because there's going to be a lot of disruptions. So even though Biden's not the world's best president at the moment, he's at least settled things for us in a peaceful manner. So think about a Trump coming in with what's happening with the Russian-Ukraine thing. China's talking about invasions in Taiwan. North Korea is, of course, doing testing at the moment very close to the South Korea border. Someone like Trump could just disrupt everything out there. So what do you want? You want stability? With maybe, an older president like we have in Biden? Or do you want someone that's just going to come out there and just
That's what
speak?
the world needs, is a guy that doesn't at 2 o'clock in the morning with
Yeah.
a whiskey tweets and gets everybody upset.
Exactly.
You want stability and safety.
You want stability.
So for the rest of the world, Biden is good.
Yeah.
For America, Trump is probably good. But for us,
Yeah, I was going to say that.
So
That's what the American people, when we've just come back, even up in Washington State, which is more Democrat,
yeah.
they all wanting Trump back in, which is quite strange.
So the expectation is that the Republicans will probably take back the country again. Yeah, I've seen a lot of that on the CNN as well. Yeah, so I mean, like even so, Trump is of course starting to with his rallies again, and he's going up against Ron DeSantis from Miami, from that region, and the expectation is Trump is just gonna roll right through everything from that perspective. So it's quite interesting to see, especially since they've got all these litigation cases against Trump and so forth. What are they able to do out there? So I guess we want to keep an eye on the news. Very, very interesting. Retirement saving perspective, ladies and gentlemen. It's a bit of a nightmare from South African perspective. And the reason for that is that only 6% of South Africans are able to retire comfortably out there. In other words, 94% of people will never be able to reach what they call your replacement ratio. So at your last day of working, if you earn 10,000 Rand, when you go into retirement, your replacement ratio should be 7,500 Rand a month. And only 6% of South Africans can get there. So what has happened is the... Okay? There's a couple of solutions. I think there's a couple of solutions out there which the Financial Planning Institute has acknowledged. For one, always work with an advisor. Work with an advisor to understand what your options are. How does it look at retirement? Are you on track to retire or you're not on track to retire? Keep in mind, advisors, they look holistically at your portfolios and your structures, what your needs are, and put that into consideration. The second one is what Fatima said is, you've got to keep on working. If you thought your retirement age is 60, you might have to push it to 65.
But a lot of companies are bringing retirement age earlier.
Yeah, 100%. So Old Mutual has one, our retirement age is 61. But that doesn't mean that has to be the end of your career though, in terms of working. You can still go into independent consulting, do extra work out there. There's always work needed for experience, isn't it? Another thing, of course, in combination with your advisor, is cut down on costs and expenses, save a little bit more. The required standard to save is 15% from the age of 23. The scary part is we only start saving later in life as South Africans. So what they're bringing out with the two-part system is, they say in South Africans, generally when they change jobs, what they've seen out in the market, instead of preserving your pension and your provident when you move jobs, what do you think the average South African is doing out there? They're accessing that money when they are moving jobs. This is why I said it, I think it's a really, really good thing that's happening in the market. What they're saying, they're going to introduce something called a two-part system. It is a work in progress at the moment, ladies and gentlemen. I do think it's a really great thing. And it's not just the government making the decision to say, this is the way it needs to work. Because as South Africans, we know none of us like that type of thing, isn't it? So what they're saying is, in combination with discussions with CISA, FBI, FPI, Financial Planning Institute, Old Mutuals and your Sanlams and so forth, what is the best scenario for the right pension sort of structure out there? And they've come up with something called a two-pot system. I have told it is a work in progress. Launch date was supposed to be 1 March 2023. They've now pushed that out another year. Basically what it says at the basis of it is that you'll have two pots, basically, as the name says, and 2/3 of what you save during the year will go into this compulsory pot. Okay. And of course, South Africans, everyone needs a little bit of access to their cash, and that's the reason that people are cashing out their pension before the time. The other 1/3 that you save up during the year will be accessible to you. So it gives you a little bit of flexibility. It gives that flexibility to say, okay, you need access to cash, you've got the 1/3 pot. But at the same time, it's forcing you to make sure by the time you retire, you still have your 2/3 pot out there.
Sorry, Roman, is that just on pensions or is it retirement annuities as well?
It's pensions, it's providence, it's retirement annuities. Okay.
So, sorry, you started with there's not a lot of enough people that can save. Only 6% people can retire independently at age 60, 65.
Yeah.
So how is this going to affect them? Do you think it will be more or less now?
I think, so to put it like this to you, those people that want to save everything while they work, will do that. That won't change their behavior. What it's doing is changing the behavior of those people that change their job every 5 years. Remember historically, people used to work 20, 30 years in one company. They didn't even look at their pension or consider, making access to their cash. New generation, your millennials, your Gen X and Z and Y and all those guys, they are saying every 3 years when they move jobs. What we are seeing is that people, they leave jobs, access their pension or provident money, they buy them BMWs, they fix their houses up, we'll save a little bit later on in life. I think it will have a positive effect.
Because they can only take 1/3 now when they leave jobs.
Yeah. Not even when they leave jobs. You can still be at the same job, but anytime during that year,
But
you'll have.
especially, to get rid of that impact that if you leave a job, you take everything out.
Correct, yeah.
You can only take 1/3 out.
Yeah.
But then the other part of it was, I think it was against your cash portion that you can take out at retirement.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
So, in my view, I think that's a really positive effect that's coming out into the market out there. It's something that's needed. And I think what will eventually happen over time, because they've got all these actuarial guys working on these numbers, that 6% will become a 20, 30% out in the market eventually over time. Still a much better scenario than what we face right now. So, of course, less people depending on the state coffers out there. Just a couple of lessons, financial 101. This is the thing that Len and Christoph and Johan and all the oaks out there and John, them all know out there in the market, is very, very basic. Inflation is your enemy, ladies and gentlemen. I think you guys know that already. But just at the very basis of it, if you look at it, your 10,000 Rand today won't be 10,000 Rand in 5 years' time. Isn't it? So your 10,000 Rand in 10 years' time will be 5,500 Rand. In 20 years' time will be something like 3,118 Rand. That's just the value of what inflation does. It erodes the true value of your capital out there. And for that reason, you need to partner up with a portfolio that's continuously beating inflation. Okay. The second enemy here is that, or the second lesson is that cash is trash. Now, I don't fully believe in that scenario because we all know that value in the bank, or money in the bank is value, isn't it? But over short-term periods of time, ladies and gentlemen. And the reason for that is you've got this thing called inflation. Inflation is running at, I mentioned it earlier, what has it been for the last year?
7.5.
I say. 7.5%. Okay. Okay. So if the bank is giving you at the moment 8% out there, and inflation is 7.5%, are you getting the real value out there? No. So it sounds great, 8% in the market is at least fixed, you guaranteed it. That's great if the period is 1 year or more, or 1 year or less, my apologies. And why is that? You've got that protection of what that is. In our industry, we call it emergency funds. You've got access to that money. It's liquidity, it's straight available funds out there. So cash is trash. It depends on how you use that cash. But over longer term periods of time, equities to be able to double your money takes 9 years. Bonds takes 44 years. And in cash there, you can see it takes 92 years to be able to double your money up in cash. So what we're seeing out in our industry is that people are investing into cash for periods 5 years or longer, and when they actually have to have access to their money, they don't take into consideration things like tax. Tax still needs to come off those rates that you're getting at the bank, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Your third one is that you need equities in your portfolio. You need those growth assets. You need that volatile assets we spoke about. When the markets fall, those equities will fall. But like I mentioned earlier, it's going to push up over time again. And what it says, and historically, performance over 86-year period, equities on average is given 14.2%. So if your inflation's at, let's just say at 5%, you do looking at about a 9% return at least on inflation year on year. Your bonds 7.7 and so forth and so forth. As you can clearly see there, your SA cash and your inflation is actually quite close to each other. So that's something we need to be cognizant of. It's great to be in cash in your portfolio for periods 1 year or less. Unless you need access to that money in, say, 18 months' time. That's fine. Anything longer than that, look at putting a little bit of equities in combination with that cash in your portfolio. And then the fourth lesson is that time is your friend. And this is one that gets drummed in our ears all the time. Stay invested in the market, like I've been talking to you guys. But if you look at what the numbers show you, ladies and gentlemen, there is no lies being told here. If you just look at what I'm talking about, that one day investing in the market, you got a 44% chance of losing your money. That's why in our world, we'll always tell a client, please stop looking at your investments every day, because it's going to scare you. It's going to make sure that you don't sleep at night. Okay, if you extend that over a period of time, I'm not going to give you each one, but over 1 year, your chance of losing money over 1 year is a 20% chance of losing money. So that's already halved over a 1 year period, because we know that markets goes through that volatile period where it's down but it's up at the same time. Okay, and then over extended periods of time, 5 years and 10 years, the possibility of losing money goes all the way down to zero.
Robin?
Yeah.
Quick question for the clients that are here. When you talk about inflation, you're talking about investing monthly or you're investing once off or post-retirement? Just for clarity for our clients.
So,
I mean, we talk about inflation. We talk about, but what does it mean for clients that invest monthly and then clients post-retirement?
so you're talking about pre and then post-retirement. Okay, good question. So pre-retirement, you can always work to be able to save until you get to that point where you have your chance to start saving up post-retirement. What we need to remember is that in post-retirement, you pay yourself. So whatever you saved up at that point of time is what you have in the bank, and you have to live off that for the rest of your life. Keep in mind, we're also living much longer than what we used to before with modern medicine and so forth. What I will say is that in post-retirement discussion is that it's very, very important that you need growth in your investment. And the reason for that is because we're living much longer than we used to. Previously, our generation, our parents and our parents before them used to live until about 60, 65, 70. So we knew that they had about 10, 15 year mortality period. Nowadays people are living 30, 40 years post-retirement. And for that reason we talk about always having growth assets in your portfolio that's able to beat inflation. Because if you're not invested in those growth assets, you're not going to be able to beat the market over a period of time. Pre-retirement, when you're saving, you can go as crazy as you want to when saving out in the market. In fact, what they say is, like I showed you with equities, if you're at 20, 25, you should probably be 100% invested in equities when you're young. Your kids and so forth out there, if they got the time in to invest. The shorter you have closer to retirement, they talk about de-risking your portfolio. So you either move into a little bit more bonds, cash, maybe reducing your equity over that period before you get to retirement. You retire and then you look out for the next 20, 30 years, what your options are. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, it does come down to your risk profile, because you never want to be in a situation where you say, I'm a conservative investor, but yet I've got a portfolio that's extremely aggressive in the market. It will scare the living daylights out of you if you're not prepared for it. Once again, that's where you partner up with these guys over there. Yeah.
Robin, you talked about inflation and staying invested in the market, but a lot of us and our clients are still cash strapped. We're sitting, or the clients are sitting with interest rates, where that is going. The talks are that to end this cycle, the interest rates are going to go up by another 0.75 basis points in November. Do you have any predictions for next year, or what's happening with interest rates, where that's going? Because that is quite a concern for cash flow and for our clients. That's car debts,
Yeah.
Home loans, credit cards. What is the prediction of that?
So the prediction, ladies and gentlemen, is once again that public enemy number one that we spoke about earlier, Jerome Powell, who heads up the Federal Reserve. If he starts seeing that inflation starts to taper off from the United States perspective, then of course the expectation for the rest of the world is that it will start to taper off here for us as well. So we're keeping our eyes very, very closely on it at the moment, Len, to make sure that that number starts decreasing from the United States in terms of what the inflation numbers are. Once the numbers start going down, and I think it's starting to stabilize at the moment, if I'm not mistaken. So once it stabilizes, the expectation is that it starts to taper off. So that's where we are right now. We need to keep our eye on what's going on there. Everything is affected by what happens in the United States. Inflation is the enemy. Okay. Expectation from the economists, guys, they do expect a few more interest rate hikes. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, that's where we spoke about that the recession kicking in. The recession kicks in, it sort of normalizes what happens in the market, if that makes sense. Puts everyone on an equal footing. It's not the greatest thing, but what it does is sort of equalizes things out there.
But surely, sorry, when a recession kicks in, the interest rate will decrease again.
Yeah. So that's the thing. So
To stimulate economic growth again, so the interest rate will decrease because the growth is not there anymore, the spending has decreased.
So there's a few things we need to consider there. Certainly, if inflation does come down, they will of course decrease the interest rates, push up economic growth out in the market.
To spend.
But there's this other scary thing out there called stagflation, which has been mentioned a lot out there in the circles out there. I think it's something that we need to consider a real thing out in the market as well. It's when inflation just doesn't go anywhere. And we live in this world where we've got high inflation rates and we've got low economic growth out in the markets. And that's a scary scenario that we could face. I know I'm telling you guys all the scary things out there that could happen in the markets, but it's the realities at the same time. Okay. So when we construct portfolios out in the markets, what we do is we try and understand where the client comes from and the client's position, what the client's risk profile is. So there's of course various sort of solutions and strategies out there in the market. We talk about CPI, which CPI is Consumer Price Index, or in other words, inflation. So we say CPI plus 2, 3, 4%, depending on what the client's risk profile is in terms to invest. Now, when a client has time to invest, I spoke about a specific asset class a client should be in. Which asset class should that be? If he's got time to invest.
Equity.
Okay. So you already got a cup. You was clearly the good student in class back in the day. Let me give it to this gentleman over here. Thank you, sir. Thank you. So you need to be invested into equities if you've got time to invest. Over short-term periods of time, cash is good, 1 year. If you extend that period of time to 3 years, you can say CPI plus 2 and so forth. But it is very time dependent. So you can look at something that are more conservative balance. It's got lower equities, more bonds and cash, gives you a little bit more protection in your portfolios. But if you've got time to invest, I said you need to be in equities. If you're not taking advantage of the value of what equities drive in the market over a long period of time, you're actually cutting yourself short in terms of your investment outcome. And as you can clearly see on the graph over there, over a 45-year period, it's almost about double the amount of opportunity that you could have garnered out of being invested in a higher, more aggressive equity balance fund out in the market. You need to take advantage of what equities can give you, especially if we do go through difficult periods in the market. From a cash perspective, the fund that I look after, it is the smooth bonus funds, the absolute growth portfolio, which I'm sure many of you guys are accustomed to. What I will say, it is the flagship fund of Old Mutual, as I mentioned earlier. The fund currently stands at about 150 billion rands assets under management in the portfolio. It is the largest smooth bonus fund in the country. In fact, our nearest competitor is currently standing at 15 billion. So 1% of where we stand at the moment. What I will say is, if you look at what the portfolio is built for, what's built for growth, ladies and gentlemen, we have various options within that portfolio, which once again means that you need to engage with the advisor to understand your risk profile and your term to invest in determining which one best suits you and your needs when it comes to investing. Okay. What I will say is that from a risk management perspective, Volatility is something real. None of us can hide away from that. And what it does cause a lot of uncertainty in the market. Let's not even lie about that. It causes a lot of uncertainty, and it causes people to panic when we see our pensions and our providence start to take effect out there. And for that reason, we have something called a risk management in our portfolio, which offers you additional levels of protection in comparison to any other fund in the market out there. No fund does what we do in the market. And what it says is that if you look at just at our asset classes, what's our drivers of growth in our portfolio? There's various drivers. So we've got local equity, which currently stand at about 45%. We've got global equity in our portfolio. We've got property, but it's property managed by Old Mutual, so it's not a listed property. We saw the markets fall about 30% over the last 4 to 5 years. And then we've also got something called local and global alternatives. So from a practical perspective, if you think about local and global alternatives, and something I'm very, very proud about, it touches on something called ESG, environmental social governance. And it says you invest into projects where it's needed across South Africa. So housing, affordable housing in South Africa. There's schools in South Africa that we invest into. As an example, I went out to Mclaurie in Durban, which is a township out in KZN, and took a bus into the area, and there's shacks everywhere in this place. And we come out to the school, and the kids are all wearing blazers with top hats. So what we're trying to do from a mutual perspective is drive high quality education. In fact, we're above the national rate when we look at our educational standards. So good education in areas that is needed. So instead of those kids having to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, take a bus to get them to school and so forth, we know that the good schools are based in the areas where they're needed. We're investing into renewable projects as an example, also across South Africa. So a lot of the wind farms that you see driving along the coast, that's Old Mutual. We've got a solar farm out solar plant out in Katu, in the Northern Cape as well, as an example. And it's one I always joke about, but from an economic perspective, we've got a prison in our portfolio called the Mangaung Correctional Center. That's in our portfolio. And the beauty of that portfolio is that we'll have tenants for life, and those guys will book themselves into the prison. But that is a asset within the portfolio where you guys invest into from a social perspective, and then we get the returns out of that, and it goes back to you guys in the form of returns to the market. So that's that ESG that you'll see a lot of it coming out in the market. They talk about sustainable assets as another example. That's what we're doing out there. So what do we do from Smooth Bonus perspective, ladies and gentlemen? We offer you guarantees in the portfolios. So there are various guarantees. Once again, please speak to your advisor about it. But we've got 50, 80, 90% or 100% level of guarantee in our portfolios. So whatever your risk profile is, I'm sure we can match each one of those out there to what your needs are in the market. What we then do from a second layer within the portfolios, we've got these drivers that give us returns, like I explained earlier. So you're getting volatility in the market. What you guys are protected from is that volatility on a day-to-day basis, because we overlay that with it's an actuarial calculation which we call smoothing. Simple as that. And all we're doing is that during the good years, 2021 last year was a fantastic year in the market, and we took a chunk of that great returns that we got in the market, we saved that returns, and during the very, very volatile period of 2022, we're able to offer that returns back to the investor. So we hold those returns over a 2-year period essentially. And what it does, guys, it gives you that peace of mind when it comes to investing, isn't it? I'll show you some of the numbers a little bit later on. But my colleague out in the Eastern Cape, in fact Fatima's colleague out there, he calls this the SWAN Fund. That stands for Sleep Well at Night. It's as simple as that. Because you don't get that situation where you're looking at market losses on a day-to-day basis. Because of the way we manage those losses. Of course, we have had one negative month over a 55-year period. That is one negative month, ladies and gentlemen. On average, portfolios give you 33% of the time negative months out there. So keep that in the back of your mind, and I'll show you some of the numbers. But anyway, so that's what our portfolio is able to do. It offers you that peace of mind. It offers you that swan effect that comes with investing. What I will say, I'm not going to go through that too much, there is a promise from Old Mutual as well. I showed it in the video, if any of you guys picked it up. And what it says is, if markets are down at that point over there, recession is, we saw it in 2008, the global financial crisis. We saw it with the dot-com bubble crash and so forth and so forth. Markets crash all the time. We've seen it happen over periods of time. What we are saying is that we won't give you the underlying market value when markets crash. It's a promise from Old Mutual. We'll give you the smoothing value at retirement, death, disability, income payments, and living annuities, and maturity on a 5-year endowment. So there's various scenarios where we're making a promise to you as the investor. Any of those events should happen, please speak to your advisors about it once again, that we will promise to pay you at the smoothing value instead of the lost value where the market is at that point in time. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, that peace of mind that we bring back to the market. But in other words, this is what markets are going on at the moment. Extremely volatile. 5% on Friday growth. We at least saw 0.2% growth, I think, yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. So it's great news. But we don't know when markets are going to fall off again. With the AGP portfolio, the absolute growth portfolio, is that solid blue line that you see there. It's that, I like to call it the little engine that could. So you can start for the club and up that hill, but we know we're going to get there at least. A lot of these guys, they sort of sluggish, then they're up, then they're sluggish, then they're up. Once again, I'll never advocate 100% within these portfolios. That's not my role. That's, of course, the discussion that you'll have. But what I will say is that these portfolios, ladies and gentlemen, offer you two things. And it's the most vital two things that comes with investing. It offers you growth in your portfolios because we've got quite an aggressively managed balance fund. It competes with the likes of your Allen Greys and your 91s and Coronations and so forth in the industry. But what it does offer you is downside protection. We've seen that downside protection of that little girl screaming their shame. But if markets go through those sort of effects, we're saying we've got your back. We've got the promise that we have managed your money in the right way, that you don't go through that sort of screaming effects in the market. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That's my story for today.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Robert, thanks a lot for the